welcome everyone once again on my behalf to this webinar today. I thank everybody for taking the time out today and being with us here today. I'm Ravi Papnoi. I'm the Deputy CEO at Ashnik. I've been here for close to 7 years now. And today I'll talk a little bit about the OTEL revolution and the role we see for OTEL in the observability space. So we all are familiar with the Linux movement. I hope most of us are, because it's been almost close to 30 years now. So if there are a few members who were not there, more than happy to once again talk about it. So we all know that when it comes to open source, predominantly there were a couple of other technologies which held the sway, and then came the Unix and the Linux revolution, and it completely changed the landscape forever. And it not only democratized Linux for everybody, but it even gave a platform or an opportunity for anybody and everybody to use Linux and be master of their own screens, their own compute, and their own computers. And we are seeing something similar happening in the observability space right now. Observability as a keyword has become very, very popular in the last 5 years or so. And earlier, people used to talk about monitoring in a piecemeal approach. There used to be monitoring for some areas. There used to be an APM. There used to be a logging solution. There used to be a metric solution. But observability as a buzzword caught on sometime around 4 or 5 years ago, and now it has grabbed imagination of almost everybody. These days, whichever customer we talk to, whichever company we talk to, almost everybody is focusing on this. But what is happening is that because this has become such a key buzzword, so has increased the proliferation of tools and platforms and technologies around this. Now there are so many different solutions which promise to solve one part of your observability, and very, very deeply and very, very in a way, very, very potently for you. Somebody says and comes and says that I'm a very good APM agent, which means that anything related to traces, they are very, very good at it. Then there are some platforms which are very, very good at logging. Similarly, some others for metrics, and some other for only networks, some for only applications, some for only infra. So what that has done, it has fragmented the market. And these days, when we go to customers, enterprises, it's not uncommon for us to hear about tens of platforms there being in a large enterprise. All the platforms are doing some or the other job. And that is not true only in case of the large enterprises. Even when we go and talk to small and medium enterprises, we hear easily 4 or 5 different names. There is a solution for APM, then there is a solution for logging, then one solution for only real user monitoring, only for stitching, journey stitching, so on and so forth. So now looking at that, when you look at keeping that in mind, when you look at OpenTelemetry, what it does, it creates an open standard, and it has a multi-vendor support. So you have a common way of collecting information, and that information can then further be disseminated and used by any variety of tools and technologies of your choice. How? Before I get into how, just I'll talk a little bit more about why. I talked about it, the proliferation of tools and technologies. But what that results into is one, vendor lock-in, because there are a lot of proprietary platforms out there, which if they collect your information, they store that information in their own format. So if they're collecting your traces, they store those traces in their own formats. And what that leads to, so I was saying that what it leads to, when you have a proliferation of so many tools and technologies and platforms, where does it lead you? It leads you to vendor lock-ins in the sense of data, that even if you have a particular tool which is only playing one part of your observability, by the virtue of storing the data in a format that is native to them, they are making sure that you cannot take the data out and use it elsewhere for other purposes. Then when you have so many platforms, you need to have different teams, or at least within teams, some members with skill set on all these different tools and technologies that you carry. And another area which in the last couple of years or 2 or 3 years we have been hearing a lot from our large enterprise customers is alert fatigue. Now, every tool and technology that you have in the space of observability creates alerts. Now, too many alerts lead to confusion. We have customers talking about hundreds or sometimes even thousands of alerts coming in every day. Some of them are so easy to ignore, but can you afford to? And how do we even figure out which ones to ignore and which ones to really go after? And of course, not to talk about the cost escalations, because instead of paying to any one partner or only one tool technology platform, you are paying to 4, 5, or 10 vendors, depending on the complexity and the size of your environment. And then, of course, data silos, because everybody is storing and extracting data, even though the same data, they are keeping it in their own platform, in their own proprietary way, that leads to data silos. And just taking a few examples, taking that forward and talking with an example, is that if you have an APM solution like Dynatrace or Datadog, what it does, it does APM monitoring, but it puts an agent or sometimes a code into your application, and it starts recording information. And they have their own agents and they have their own way of collecting the information. And then the data that goes inside these platforms cannot be taken out and used by any other tool that you would like to plug and play with these technologies. So it's an example of what I just talked about in my previous slide. And that leads us to OTEL and the revolution that we are talking and we are seeing play out in the market today. What OTEL does, it simply enables you to collect logs, metrics, traces from various kind of sources and put them into one single place where it processes. The keyword here is process, that green box that you see on your screen. So in processing this information, what an OTEL collector does is that it gives you a common schema, which means that from here, when a data goes through this pipeline and comes out of it, it comes in a common schema that can be utilized by any tool or technology you want to have in your environment. You again will see some names on the bottom of your screen. It could be Elastic, Prometheus, Loki. There are many ways you can utilize that information. But the most important part is that OTEL makes it possible for you to have everything in a common schema. Then, whenever we are keeping spans, wherever we are capturing spans, we are doing capturing traces. We know that we don't want to store each and every span, because that is going to unnecessarily put burden on your storage, and then is unnecessarily going to fill up your storage too soon. So what do we do? So you have options like tail sampling available to you. You have resource attributes available to you, which means that if you want to know what exactly went wrong and in a complete microservices, you have the option to go down to a particular pod, to a particular container. And it's very, very comprehensive, very, very vendor agnostic in the way I talked about common schema. So it enables you to have a complete control over your data. And when you have the control, then where you export that data to and how do you figure out that data to be consumed is totally becomes a decision under your control. So that simplifies to a large extent your entire observability journey. And then taking that forward, the correlation power. Something that really, really troubles a lot of team is the correlation, because when you have one tool capturing your network data, one tool capturing your database data, one for infra, one for application, how do you bring everything together? In fact, we all know that there are solutions that only come and talk about stitching of that data, because that whole journey has been made so difficult by some of these uh, proprietary technologies and platforms out there, that there is money to be had just by stitching everything together. And that's a very big problem that OTEL solves for you, because you have control over the data you are collecting. You can decide how do you correlate it, how do you look at the data, and how do you simply consume that data. Moving forward, I talked about mostly the infra application and the database and services data. Then when you go to hardware devices, you have another challenge at your hand, that most of these software agents would not sit on your hardware devices, because the hardware OEMs would not allow that. So for that, OTEL solves that problem by leveraging the capabilities of edge OTEL collectors. So whether it is a database, whether it is an application or a container or a firewall or a physical load balancer, you can bring everything together through those OTEL collectors, put a load balancing agent in front of it, and then let it be consumed by any tool of your choice. And it makes it very, very easy, scalable, and easily consumable at an enterprise level. And what it all leads to. So the entire story that I talked in the last 7 8 minutes, it ultimately leads to a unified observability in true sense. And in unified observability has again become a term that you would hear these days, that most of the people talk about unified observability, because observability in itself as a standalone doesn't really go anywhere. So you need unified observability, a way to have a look at your complete infra, application, network, and every piece of your landscape, your tech stack at a single place. And that leads to observability. And when you have control over how you're collecting that data and how you're storing that data, most importantly, how you're storing the data in a common schema, in a common data type, you can visualize it the way you want to. On spot correlation, of course, because you are capturing everything together and you are processing everything through the same agent, the same collector, you get correlations which are not giving you false positives, or which are not leading you somewhere where your problem doesn't lie, but rather lead you to a problem place where actually you can find a solution to your problem. And then I talk about vendor flexibility, that when you have the control over the data, then you can decide where do you export that data to. Then whichever layer you feel comfortable with, you feel most well familiarized yourself with, and makes commercially as well sense to the enterprises, you have the choice over it by yourself. And of course, I talked about single data model. And most importantly is the last point, control over decisions. This is what most of the enterprises struggle with these days. And that holds true in case of a database. It holds true in case of a analytics platform. It holds true in case of a observability solution as well. That you only have control over your own data. But once that data goes into a particular system, you lose control. And that's where then you are either married to into a relationship, even if you like, there is no way out. But what OTEL promises to do is that it democratizes that data, and you get to decide which vendor to work with and which vendor not to work with, and take decisions based on uh, your comfort with the technology, with the stack, with the cost considerations, so on and so forth. So that complete democratization is what is really, really important, and that in truly, in a sense, is what OTEL enables. So that's all from my end. I hope you liked the talk, and thanks once again for being here. I'll hand it over to Abhishek once again, and for him to introduce Nilesh so that he can take over.